Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello again to another season of Brain Talk. And this time we'll talk about the frontal and temporal and also the limbic system. And as we mentioned before, all the images here is referred to Dr. Albert Rhoton. So let's look, a subcortical white matter anatomy of the frontal lobe. The lateral surface of the frontal lobe is bordered, posteriorly by the central sulcus and superiorly by the superior hemispheric border. As we see in this picture, we have the frontal lobe here, we have the temporal lobe here, we have the parietal lobe. The frontal lobe, bordered posteriorly by these a very unique sulcus. It's called the central sulcus, and is bordered, inferiorly by the Sylvian fissure, that's separated from the temporal lobe. So, as we mentioned before, the lower border of the lateral surface of the frontal lobe, has called the anterior part that face the orbital roof, and posterior part is called the Sylvian fissure that face the temporal lobe through the Sylvian fissure. So if in the subcortical white matter organization of the frontal lobe, we have like projection fibers, and we have commercial fibers and association fibers, which differ to the short and long pathways. We see here these projection fibers. It's called the corona radiata, and here also these small fibers. It's called U fibers, and it's a type of association fibers. Here is the short association fibers, which called U fibers, that connects gyri or neighboring gyri each others. Here is the long association fibers, which is called superior longitudinal fascicles, SLF1, LSF2, and SLF3. This is the superior longitudinal fascicles, as mentioned before, number 2, and is location in the middle frontal gyrus. Medial to the SLF2, there is called corona radiata, and is containing the frontal projection fibers. And as we mentioned also in the last lecture, this is the corona radiata is mixed from fibers coming from the internal capsule and the external capsule. Further dissection of the frontal lobe, we have the callosal fibers. The callosal fibers is at the level of the superior frontal gyrus. So here is the frontal or superior frontal gyrus has been removed out to see the callosal fibers underneath the longitudinal fascicles. The frontal horn, this is, the lateral ventricle. As we see here, this is the frontal horn and the body of the lateral ventricle. We see also the insular area. The insular area is in the level of the we can see here is the lateral ventricle and the insula. The insula is in the level of the inferior frontal gyrus, whereas the frontal horn and the body of the lateral ventricle in the level of the middle frontal gyri. As you know, before we mentioned, anterior insular point is the meeting point between the superior limiting sulcus and the anterior limiting sulcus, and it is a very important location for the neurosurgical approach. As we see here, why it's important? This area is near from the caudate nucleus and also is near from the ventricle sides. So the anterior insular point is corresponding to the frontal horn of the lateral ventricle and also the caudate nucleus, or the head of the caudate nucleus. The cingulum is a part of a limbic system and is above the corpus callosum, and the cingulum is ran medial to the corpus or callosal fibers. This is the callosal fibers, this is the cingulum, this is the lateral, this is the medial side. And here we have a similar dissection in other specimen. The relation between the callosal fibers, as we see in these lateral sides, and also here is the cingulum in the medial side. So, after removing the centrum semo-ovale, we can expose the contralateral frontal lobe in other side. Here is the lateral ventricle, here is the septum pallidum here is the sulcus of the insula, and here is the insula in this side, and is the tumbral side, and is the brachial side. Here is the central sulcus, and is the anterior cerebral artery. Here is the middle cerebral artery. After further dissection of the central core area, we can expose what's called the inferior frontal occipital fascicles, and also the putamen. Putamen is here. So after seeing the frontal lobe, this is the frontal lobe. After dissection all the fibers, we move to the temporal lobe. So our dissection will start from lateral to the medial. The temporal cortex and the short association fibers here was removed. Will expose long association fibers only. The both is called medial and inferior longitudinal fascicles originate from the temporal pugil. This is the middle and inferior linguinal fascicles. The middle linguinal fascicles, courses inside the superior temporal gyrus, and the inferior linguinal fascicles is coursing inside the inferior temporal gyrus. Further dissection for these long fibers, we can see the position of uncinate fascicles, which interconnects between the frontal lobe and to the temporal pole. Here is the inferior frontal occipital fascicles. After removing the uncinate fascicles and the inferior frontal occipital fascicles, and also the extension of anterior commissure, we can expose the what's called optic radiation. The optic radiation is rise from something called the lateral geniculate body. The optic radiation fibers is medial to the inferior. This is the inferior limiting sulcus, and forms the roof and lateral wall of the temporal horn of the temporal horn. And here is the lateral geniculate body, and here is the optic radiation, and here is the inferior limiting sulcus. Here is, as we said, optic radiation, and here is the inferior limiting sulcus, and here is the tail of the caudate nucleus. And we said this is, optic radiation is cover only the roof and lateral wall. Here is the roof and lateral wall of the temporal horn. So finally, just look at the limbic system. The limbic system is, is a group of interconnected, cortical and subcortical areas that links, visceral state, emotion, and cognition and behavior. This is a nice view of the limbic system. So limbic system is composed of what's called parahippocampal gyrus, the hippocampal formation, which hidden, and also cingulate gyrus. The parahippocampal gyrus is like an C-shaped gyrus, and the parahippocampal gyrus is very important for nursing and behavior and also attention. This is the parahippocampal gyrus in the temporal lobe, inside the temporal lobe. So is just actually between the uncus and between the isthmus of the cingulate gyrus. So the parahippocampus gyrus is between the uncus and isthmus of the cingulate gyrus. The isthmus of the cingulate gyrus is the place where the lingual gyrus merges into it. Here is the cingulate gyrus to the parahippocampus area through the isthmus, and we have here lingual gyrus. We in these specimens we can find it's called a collateral sulcus. We separated the hippocampus from the fusiform gyrus. This gyrus, or this in this picture, we have something like a hawk anteriorly called the uncus. The parahippocampus and the uncus lie laterally and envelop the hippocampus. The hippocampus plays a very important role in the memory function. This is the cingulum, is a long association fibrous pathway. What cingulum is interconnects the parahippocampus to the cingulate gyri. Here is medial view. We see the subcortical area of the limbic system, basically include the olfactory system, the septal area here, and hypothalamus area, and the amygdala here. This is the olfactory system. This is the septal area, and this is the hypothalamus area, and this is the amygdala. The best now limbic pathway that interconnects the limbic cortical and subcortical area is called the Pepys circuit. Here is the Pepys circuit. What is the Pepys circuit? Here, the fibers leave the hippocampus area for a hippocampal formation and proceed through the fornix to the mammillary bodies. After that, a new pathway is called, mammillary thalamic tract, ascending information to the thalamic nucleus. The information in the anterior, thalamic nucleus continues to the cingulate gyrus, by means of thalamo-cingulate fibers. The thalamo-cingulate fibers pass through the internal, after that, through the internal capsule. From, we know cingulate gyrus, the formation carries to the parahippocampus by the cingulum. The parahippocampus gyrus, project to the hippocampal formation. Pepys circuit is very important in learning and memory. By these last slides, we finished our last part of the cerebrum pathway. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll continue our brain talk in other lecture. Thank you so much again.